A cold wind moved through the narrow streets of Brookdale, as flashing police lights reflected off the windows of small houses. The neighborhood had grown used to those lights over the years, and almost every time they appeared, people already knew who was responsible: Officer Kevin Brooks. For many people in Brookdale, Brooks wasn't a protector. He was something else entirely. Fear. The police cruiser rolled slowly through the quiet street like a predator searching for its next target. Brooks sat behind the wheel, his eyes scanning every corner, every sidewalk, every passing car. Then he saw him, a young black man walking home with a backpack slung over his shoulder. Brooks narrowed his eyes. The cruiser slowed. The siren chirped once. The young man stopped and turned around. "Hey!" Brooks shouted from the car window. "Come here!" The young man approached slowly, cautious but respectful. "Yes, officer." Brooks stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his belt as he looked the young man up and down. "What are you doing out here?" "I'm walking home." Brooks tilted his head slightly. "Where from?" "College. Evening classes." Brooks smirked. "College, huh?" The young man nodded. "My name is Elijah Brown." Brooks circled him slowly. "You look nervous." "I'm not nervous," Elijah said calmly. "Just trying to get home." Brooks suddenly grabbed Elijah's arm and turned him toward the cruiser. "You match the description of someone involved in an assault earlier tonight." Elijah's eyes widened. "What? I didn't assault anyone." Brooks ignored him and pushed him against the car. Within minutes, Elijah Brown was sitting in the back of the cruiser in handcuffs. The charge would be assault and resisting arrest. Another report, another arrest, another life suddenly thrown into chaos. Inside the police station, Brooks typed the report with practiced ease. Suspect acting aggressively, threatening behavior. Officer Forster detained. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Another problem removed from the streets. Across town, Elijah's mother received a phone call that changed her world. Her son had been arrested. When she arrived at the jail and saw Elijah sitting behind the glass partition, tears filled her eyes. "You told me you were coming straight home." "I was," Elijah said quietly. "He just stopped me." "Why?" Elijah shook his head. "I don't know." But deep down, both of them already suspected the answer. Officer Kevin Brooks had a reputation. Over the years, dozens of young black men in Brookdale had faced charges that didn't seem to make sense, but proving anything had always been impossible. Until now, Elijah's case landed in the hands of a public defender named Laura Mitchell. Laura had been practicing law for nearly 15 years, and something about the police report immediately bothered her. She sat across from Elijah during their first meeting inside the small legal interview room. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. Elijah explained everything carefully. The walk home, the sudden stop, the accusation. Laura listened without interrupting. When he finished, she flipped through the police report again. "This officer claims you attacked someone before he stopped you." Elijah frowned. "I didn't." Laura nodded slowly. "I believe you." Elijah looked surprised. "Really?" Laura closed the folder. "Yes, because this report doesn't make sense." Over the next few days, Laura began digging into Officer Kevin Brooks' history. What she found disturbed her. Case after case showed similar patterns: young black men arrested, weak evidence, quick convictions based entirely on Brooks' testimony. Laura spread the files across her office desk late one night. There were more than 30 cases, all with the same officer, all with questionable details. "This isn't coincidence," she whispered. The next morning, she contacted an investigative journalist named Daniel Reeves, who had been reporting on police accountability. When Daniel reviewed the cases, his eyes widened. "This is huge." Laura nodded. "But we need proof." Meanwhile, Elijah remained in jail waiting for trial. Days turned into weeks, but Laura refused to stop searching. She began requesting surveillance footage from nearby businesses on the street where Elijah had been arrested. Most of the cameras hadn't captured the exact moment, but one small convenience store camera had a partial view of the sidewalk. Laura watched the footage carefully. Elijah walking calmly, Brooks' cruiser stopping beside him. No sign of any assault. But something else caught her attention. Brooks speaking into his radio before he even stepped out of the car. Laura leaned closer to the screen. It looked like he was reporting the crime before anything had even happened. She immediately contacted the police department requesting Brooks' radio communication record. The department initially resisted, but the court eventually ordered the records released. When Laura received the recordings, she played them carefully. Brooks' voice filled the room. "Dispatch, suspect located matching earlier assault description." Laura paused the recording. Earlier assault. She quickly searched through police records from that night. There had been no assault reported before Elijah's arrest. None. Her heart started racing. Brooks had invented the crime. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the trial. Elijah sat beside Laura at the defense table, nervous but determined. Across the room, Officer Kevin Brooks sat confidently in his uniform. He had testified in dozens of cases before, This one felt no different. When Laura began her cross-examination, the room grew quiet. "Officer Brooks," she said calmly, "you claim you arrested Elijah Brown after responding to an assault report." "Yes." "Who reported the assault?" Brooks hesitated slightly. "A witness on the street." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Nay, I don't recall." Laura nodded slowly. "Interesting." She turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to play an audio recording." The courtroom speakers crackled. Brooks' voice filled the room again. "Dispatch, suspect located matching earlier assault description." Laura paused the audio. "Officer Brooks," she said quietly, "there was no assault reported before this transmission." The courtroom murmured. Brooks shifted uncomfortably. Laura continued, "And surveillance footage shows Mr. Brown walking peacefully before you stopped him." The judge leaned forward. "Officer Brooks," Janier explained this. Brooks opened his mouth, but no words came out. Laura placed several folders on the evidence table. "These are 32 additional cases involving Officer Brooks with similar questionable circumstances." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Laura's voice grew stronger. "This pattern shows a clear abuse of power targeting innocent citizens." By the end of the trial, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge dismissed all charges against Elijah Brown. But the consequences didn't stop there. An internal investigation into Officer Brooks was immediately launched. Over the following weeks, dozens of previous cases were reopened. Several innocent people were released from jail. And eventually Officer Kevin Brooks stood in the same courtroom as a defendant. The judge spoke firmly during sentencing. "A police officer who abuses authority damages public trust and destroys lives." Brooks was sentenced to prison for multiple counts of false arrest and misconduct. Months later, Elijah Brown stood outside the courthouse once again. This time he wasn't a defendant. He was a symbol of justice. Reporters surrounded him. "What will you do now?" Elijah smiled calmly. "I'm going back to school." Laura stood beside him proudly. "Law school," Elijah added. The reporters looked surprised. Elijah nodded. "Because nobody should go through what I did without someone fighting for them." As he walked down the courthouse steps into the sunlight, Elijah felt something powerful inside him. The system that had nearly destroyed his future had also shown him his purpose. And the officer who once abused his badge to control others was now facing the justice he had tried to deny for so long. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and members of the Brookdale community. News of Officer Kevin Brooks's conviction had spread across the city faster than anyone expected. For years, people had whispered about his behavior, but now the truth had finally been proven in a courtroom. Elijah Brown stood quietly near the railing, holding a folder that contained the court documents clearing his name. The cool afternoon wind moved through the street, but for the first time in months, Elijah felt calm. Laura Mitchell walked down the courthouse steps beside him. "You handled that well," she said. Elijah gave a small smile. "I was nervous." He didn't show it. Across the street, a group of people from Elijah's neighborhood had gathered. Some waved when they saw him. An older man stepped forward and shook Elijah's hand. "We watched the whole trial on the news," he said. "You did something important." Elijah looked slightly confused. "I just told the truth." The man nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." A few minutes later, another familiar voice called his name. "Elijah." He turned around and saw his mother walking quickly toward him. Tears filled her eyes as she wrapped him in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Elisha hugged her back. "It's finally over." Laura smiled as she watched them, but the story wasn't completely finished yet. The conviction of Officer Brooks had triggered a massive internal investigation inside the police department. Detectives and prosecutors were now reviewing dozens of cases connected to him. Many of those cases involved people who had already served time in jail. 1 week after the trial, Laura sat in her office with a stack of legal documents spread across her desk. Elijah sat across from her. "These are the first 6 cases being reopened," she explained. Elijah looked at the names carefully. "Does that mean those people might be innocent?" Laura nodded. "Very likely." Elijah leaned back in his chair, thinking. "All because Brooks wanted power." Laura sighed. Abuse of power often goes unnoticed until someone challenges it. Elijah looked at the papers again. "Maybe if my case hadn't happened." Laura interrupted gently. "Your case helped expose everything." Later that evening, Elijah returned to his old neighborhood. The same streets that once felt tense now seemed different. People were standing outside their homes talking about the news. A small group of teenagers approached him near the basketball court. "Hey, Elijah," one of them said. "We saw what happened on TV." Another added, "You stood up to that cop." Elijah smiled slightly. "I had help." "But you didn't give up," the first boy said. Elijah thought for a moment before answering. "Giving up would have meant letting a lie become the truth." The teenagers nodded quietly. That night, Elijah sat in his bedroom looking at his college textbooks stacked on the desk. For months, his life had been paused by a crime he never committed. But now everything was moving forward again. He opened one of his notebooks and began writing. At the top of the page, he wrote 2 words: law school. Across town, inside a prison transport bus, Kevin Brooks stared out through the small metal window. The same city he once patrolled now passed by outside as he sat in handcuffs. The bus eventually stopped at the gates of a correctional facility. Guards escorted Brooks inside. For years he had walked into buildings like this with authority and confidence. Now he entered as an inmate. As the heavy metal doors closed behind him, the reality of his actions finally caught up with him. Meanwhile, weeks continued to pass in Brookdale. More court hearings followed, more cases connected to Brooks who were overturned. Several men who had spent years in prison were finally released. During one of the hearings, the judge addressed the courtroom firmly. The abuse of authority shown in these cases is deeply troubling. Justice must correct these wrongs. Elijah attended one of those hearings quietly, sitting in the back row. When one of the wrongfully accused men walked out of the courtroom as a free person, Elijah felt something powerful inside his chest. Justice didn't just free him, it was freeing others too. After the hearing, Laura joined him outside. "You've been coming to a lot of these," she said. Elijah nodded. "I want to see it through." Laura looked at him thoughtfully. Law schools look for people with real experiences like yours." Elijah smiled. "That's the plan." Months later, Elijah stood on the steps of Brookdale Community College wearing a backpack again. Students moved through the campus around him as classes resumed for the semester. Everything felt normal again. But Elijah wasn't the same person who had been arrested on that street months earlier. That experience had changed his path. One afternoon, while leaving class, he stopped near the campus lawn and looked at the city skyline in the distance. Somewhere out there were people still fighting for justice. And someday soon, he would be one of the people helping them. Because the night officer Kevin Brooks abused his badge and arrested an innocent man. He, unknowingly, created the very person who would spend his life fighting against injustice. And in the end, the power Brooks tried to use to destroy lives had done the opposite. It had inspired someone to protect them.